Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're diving deep into the heart of Wilkie Collins' classic, The Moonstone, a novel that really continues to captivate readers with its layers of mystery, suspense, and, well, deeply ingrained cultural beliefs. At its core, we're asking a pretty fundamental question. To what extent were the tumultuous events surrounding the Moonstone's disappearance and its eventual recovery primarily driven by, say, the ancient superstitious curse and the unwavering pursuit of its traditional guardians, or versus the more rational explanations rooted in human motivations, inherent weaknesses, and, observable scientific phenomena?
Exactly. It's that core tension that makes the book so enduring, isn't it?
It really is. So I'll be arguing that the Moonstone's ancient history and its perceived curse fundamentally shaped its journey, subtly, almost, you could say fatedly, steering the destinies of those entangled with it.
And I'll be countering that, positing that human actions, driven by very personal motives and, frankly, explainable circumstances, are the true forces at play here. The curse, while, yes, a compelling narrative device, often serves as a kind of convenient smokescreen for very human follies and calculated strategies.
Okay, well, let me lay out my position then. For me, the Moonstone is far more than just a valuable gem. It's presented as an artifact imbued with profound, almost sacred significance. The narrative starts by immersing us in its ancient origins, describing it as having been, quote, set in the forehead of the four-handed Indian god who typifies the moon and, crucially believed to be feeling the influence of the deity whom it adorned. Now, this isn't just simple folklore thrown in for color. I think it establishes a powerful, almost living presence, an enduring force beyond typical human control that subtly guides its own destiny. You could almost see it as a character itself. And this divine connection, it's underscored by the centuries-long vigil of the three Brahmins. They watched their priceless moonstone, night and day, an unyielding, almost, preordained commitment to its guardianship that persistently resurfaces throughout the story, transcending generations and geographies. We also see these immediate negative consequences for those who violated sacred trust. Colonel Herncastle's violent acquisition of the gem, for example, resulted in his life being twice threatened in India, and his social ostracization back in England, with the Moonstone thought to be at the bottom of it again. These aren't just random misfortunes. They're presented, I believe, as direct manifestations of the stone's ominous influence, a kind of karmic retribution. And finally, the relentless appearance of the three Indians in England, tracking the Moonstone and culminating in the murder of Godfrey Ablewhite to obtain possession of the diamond. That strongly indicates a persistent, maybe even supernaturally guided pursuit, an unwavering dedication to fulfilling the stone's ancient destiny.
Okay, I see the points you're making, pulling on that thread of the sacred and the fated, but I come at it from a different perspective entirely. I view the narrative as a masterful illustration of how rational inquiry and, frankly, human agency can peel back layers of apparent mystery. The text itself, I think, provides clear, logical alternatives to any mystical interpretation. I mean, consider Colonel Herncastle's own father. He dismissed the danger of his being murdered as absurd, didn't he? He attributed those claims to the colonel's notorious opium eater habits.
Right, but he was perhaps willfully blind.
Well, maybe, but he firmly emphasizes nothing in this world, Betteridge, is probable unless it appeals to our own trumpery experience. Now, this isn't just a dismissive old man, is it? It establishes a rational framework right from the outset, kind of nudging the reader away from the fantastical, or at least offering a strong counter-narrative. And crucially, the diamond's initial disappearance from Lady Verandra's house, which seems so baffling at first, is definitively explained by the precise medical and scientific insight of Ezra Jennings. He deduces and then experimentally proves that Franklin Blake, unknowingly under the influence of laudanum, a powerful opiate very commonly prescribed back then, took the diamond in a somnambulistic state, a form of sleepwalking where actions are performed unconsciously. This is physiological, entirely natural, not supernatural. And similarly, Godfrey Ablewhite's true character, masked by his public persona as a Christian hero and philanthropist, reveals a man driven by very human financial problems. Mr. Bruss later infers that Godfrey needed a large sum of money by a given time, which ultimately led him to pawn the Moonstone. His subsequent murder by the Indians is a direct criminal consequence of this greedy action, not some mystical retribution. And finally, Rosanna Spearman. Her tragic involvement and suicide, they're explicitly rooted in her mad and unrequited love for Franklin Blake, and her mistaken belief that he was the thief, spurred on by Sergeant Seagrave's initial blunders. Her letter makes her motives heartbreakingly clear. I was mad enough to love you, and I couldn't even attract your notice. There was great misery. Her actions were a direct result of profound personal suffering and a misguided attempt to protect or express her feelings for Franklin.
These are all thoroughly human stories, aren't they? Not mystical ones.
That's an interesting point regarding human motivations, yes, but I'd frame it differently when we consider the pervasive influence of ancient prophecy. You touched on the Brahmin's watch, but let's delve into why it's so significant. The enduring tradition describing the Moonstone as feeling the influence of the deity whom it adorned, and growing and lessening in luster with the waxing and waning of the moon. That isn't just a quaint belief, is it? It permeates the entire narrative, suggesting an intrinsic, ancient power that actively guides events. It's almost as if the stone itself has agency. How else do we explain the Indians' precise appearance on Rachel's birthday, the very day the Moonstone was removed from the bank and worn?
Well, planning, maybe.
Planning based on what? This isn't just a coincidence. It points to an almost prophetic understanding of its movements. Mr. Bruff himself notes they were rewarded for the patient accuracy of their calculations by seeing the Moonstone in the bosom of her dress. Now, these calculations, they don't strike me as mundane detective work, but rather a kind of fated alignment, an almost supernatural insight that fulfills their long-held sacred mission. Don't you think Collins is suggesting that some truths resonate beyond empirical proof, tapping into something, primal about human belief?
I see why you'd think that. And the narrative certainly makes a strong case for the power of tradition. I grant you that. But I just don't buy that it's anything beyond shrewd human calculation. The fanciful story of the Moonstone's origins is just that. A narrative backdrop Collins uses brilliantly to build suspense, sure, but not a driver of events. The Indians' arrival and surveillance were demonstrably strategic, not prophetic. I mean, Penelope, who's a pretty sharp observer, she even had the notion that they were, quote, rehearsing their hocus pocus to foretell Mr. Franklin's arrival by magic simply for money. That indicates a calculated performance, perhaps exploiting superstition for gain.
Possibly.
And their later actions are also clearly tactical, meticulously tracking the gem after it was pawned. Mr. Bruff, whose insights are often the most pragmatic in the book, offers a much more rational analysis. He explains that after Colonel Herncastle's death and the will was read, the safest course for the Indians was, quote, to wait till the diamond was at the disposal of a young girl who would innocently delight in wearing the magnificent jewel. This indicates a deliberate, calculated plan based on anticipating human behavior, not mystical foresight. Their calculations were about the diamond's security and finding the opportune moment to strike. A very worldly objective driven by patience and intelligence, not some divine schedule. To elevate this to prophecy, I think kind of misses the human ingenuity Collins is so adept at portraying.
But isn't the atmosphere surrounding Franklin Blake's arrival with the Moonstone immediately charged with foreboding, almost as if the curse is already at work, even before anything ostensibly supernatural happens? He suspects he has been followed and watched in London, and Penelope, a generally sensible character, immediately believes the Indians meant some mischief to Mr. Franklin Blake. This pre-existing tension, it isn't just a feeling, it sets the stage for a whole chain of unsettling events. And what about Rachel's unexplained, almost irrational hostility towards Franklin after the disappearance? And her unwavering conviction that he was the thief? This goes beyond simple human misunderstanding, surely. It speaks to a deeper, unsettling influence of the stone that warps perceptions and creates this emotional turmoil. It's as if the stone's malevolent presence, or maybe just the belief in it, creates the conditions for these misunderstandings and tragic outcomes.
Even if a rational explanation eventually emerges, doesn't that initial profound disruption point to something beyond the everyday?
That's a compelling argument regarding the atmosphere and the psychological impact of the mystery, and Collins certainly crafts that brilliantly. No argument there. However, the mystery, for all its unsettling initial effects, is ultimately methodically unraveled by Ezra Jennings, who is just a fantastic counterpoint to all the prevailing superstitions. He doesn't rely on intuition or ancient texts. He uses medical records in scientific literature, specifically Dr. Elliotson's Human Physiology, to explain the disappearance. He deduces precisely how the stimulating influence of opium, administered unknowingly by Mr. Candy as a cold remedy, could intensify Franklin's pre-existing apprehensions about the safety of the diamond, leading him to unconsciously hide it.
Okay, yes, Jennings's role is pivotal.
It is, and the key, the scientific triumph, really, is the successful replication of this event. With the second dose of laudanum, Franklin again, unwittingly, hid a mock diamond in his room. This provides, I think, pretty incontrovertible proof of a medical, not a mystical cause. Franklin's initial confusion about the theft and Betteridge's immediate dismissal of him being drunk simply underscore that the events were outside conscious control, but still entirely physiologically explainable. It's not supernatural. It's a fascinating, if maybe rare, medical incident. Don't you think Collins is making a powerful case for the triumph of Victorian scientific method over inherited folklore with this very specific and verifiable solution?
While the scientific explanation for the disappearance is indeed ingenious and a hallmark of Collins' craft, I agree. It doesn't negate the sheer human tragedies the Moonstone leaves in its wake. Consider Rosanna Sperman. She's a reformed thief, trying to live an honest life, yet she's deeply affected by the Moonstone's presence. She develops this obsessive, unrequited love for Franklin Blake that drives her to make a duplicate nightgown, hide the stained one, and ultimately take her own life in the treacherous shivering sand. Her madness and tragic end, can't they be viewed as another victim of the Moonstone's baleful influence, twisting human emotions into destructive, fatal paths? Is it merely coincidence that the deepest human vulnerabilities seem to be exacerbated by this specific gem?
But exacerbated by the gem or the circumstances around the gem?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And similarly, Godfrey Abblewhite, the supposed Christian hero and beacon of virtue, he also meets a violent, ignominious end, smothered by the Indians. He is effectively consumed by the gem he tried to exploit, a clear consequence, I'd argue, of its ancient, dangerous legacy. These aren't just isolated incidents. They weave a pattern of destruction around the stone.
I would argue, though, that those tragic outcomes, while undeniably powerful, are deeply rooted in profound human emotion and very specific circumstances, rather than the Moonstone's mystical influence. Rosanna's actions are a direct result of her personal history and emotional vulnerability. Her isolation in history as a forlorn woman made her susceptible to an intense, unreciprocated love. Her desperate fancy to protect Franklin from suspicion by hiding the nightgown was born of that love, not a curse. Her suicide, heartbreaking as it is a culmination of her personal despair and misunderstanding, explicitly detailed in her letter. Remember, her letter comes and tells me that she has done with the burden of her life. Her letter comes and bids me goodbye forever. This is a raw, agonizing depiction of human suffering, not, some supernatural puppet show. And as for Godfrey Abblewhite, his awful backslidings and ultimate death are attributable to his very human vices, greed and deception. His desperate need for money led him to palm the diamond. The retaliatory actions of the Indians, as Sergeant Cuff, another voice of rational deduction, clearly states, were driven by their objective to retrieve the physical gem, to gain possession of the diamond. These are clear criminal motivations and consequences, not supernatural retribution. It highlights how Collins uses the mystery of the Moonstone to expose the hypocrisy and moral failings of Victorian society, rather than solely relying on the fantastic. The stone merely acts as a catalyst, I think, for revealing what's already present in human character.
But isn't the fact that the Moonstone is a catalyst for such intense, destructive human behavior precisely the point? It seems to amplify or awaken these latent flaws in people who come into contact with it. You talk about Rosanna's vulnerability, But why does this particular gem provoke such an extreme, self-destructive devotion? Why doesn't Godfrey's greed, which surely existed before, lead to his violent demise until he attempts to exploit this specific artifact? It's not just any diamond, it's the Moonstone. This suggests an innate quality, perhaps, almost a malevolent energy that preys on human weaknesses and sets these tragedies in motion, aligning with the ancient belief that it feels the influence of the deity whom it adorned, and that influence, in the wrong hands, is devastating. Collins, I think, is inviting us to consider that some objects carry a weight, a history, that can profoundly impact human psychology in ways we can't always rationalize.
I understand the allure of that interpretation, that the Moonstone is somehow imbued with a quality that brings out the worst in people. It's a powerful idea. But I'd counter that it's the value of the Moonstone, both monetary and symbolic, that amplifies these existing human flaws, not some inherent mystical quality. Rosanna's love was for Franklin, yes, who was connected to the diamond, but her despair stemmed from her own past, her social isolation and unrequited feelings, not the stone itself. The Moonstone was merely the stage upon which her personal drama tragically unfolded. And Godfrey's greed, while surely present, found its ultimate fatal expression because the Moonstone offered a massive financial opportunity. Any other hugely valuable object might have pushed him to similar extremes, perhaps.
Perhaps, but
And the Indians were not acting on a curse. They were fulfilling a generational obligation to retrieve a sacred object that they valued above all else, and they did so with calculated, brutal efficiency when it was stolen. The tragedies aren't because the Moonstone is cursed, but because human beings, driven by love, greed, and deeply held cultural beliefs, react to it in powerful and often destructive ways. The author is cleverly demonstrating that it's our own interpretations, our own desires, and our own moral compasses that truly dictate our fate, not some external supernatural force.
As we conclude this discussion, it's clear that the Moonstone story presents a rich, interwoven tapestry of explanations, and Collins's genius really lies in how deftly he layers them. I've tried to highlight the persistent threads of ancient belief and the unwavering actions of its traditional guardians, suggesting a deeper, almost faded influence that permeates the narrative and subtly yet powerfully shapes the outcomes. The enduring mystique of the gem and the belief in its sacred power, they certainly seem to dictate behavior and perceptions throughout the story.
And I, meanwhile, have tried to meticulously draw out the logical, human, and yes, scientific reasons behind each twist and turn, revealing a narrative fundamentally grounded in character and circumstance. A narrative where the mysteries are ultimately resolved through rational inquiry, rather than reliance on the supernatural. Collins masterfully uses a Gothic premise, I believe, to subtly argue for the triumph of Victorian scientific method over inherited folklore, showcasing how human intelligence can unravel even the most bewildering events.
Yes, the material beautifully demonstrates how deeply rooted cultural beliefs and ancient legends can indeed shape perceptions, motivate actions, and give a powerful sense of an unfolding destiny around a gem like the Moonstone. It definitely creates an almost palpable sense of foreboding and an enduring question about the nature of fate itself.
While simultaneously providing concrete, rational explanations for seemingly mysterious events, grounding the fantastical and the very real vulnerabilities and motivations of its human characters. The true power of the Moonstone, I think we can agree, lies in its ability to simultaneously entertain and profoundly challenge our understanding of what constitutes truth or fate, making us question where the line between the two truly lies.
absolutely. Ultimately, the reader is left to weigh the compelling evidence from both perspectives, recognizing that the intricate interplay of ancient mystique and undeniable human agency creates a far richer, more complex understanding of the Moonstone's tumultuous, captivating journey. There truly is always more to explore in the depths of such a narrative, and Collins ensures we keep asking those fundamental questions.